findings were that there is a staggeringly high social media consumption within both the European Parliament and the Brussels bubble as a whole. And I think it's reasonable to assume from the research findings that we can split that usage down into three groups. People who use social media passively, they go there for information. People who use it actively, which may be where they're conducting a conversation, and where they use it what I would call super actively, which is to get a message out to either their constituents or to the wider policy community. Whatever they use it for though, the figures are unequivocal. The use of the social media is really staggeringly high. MEPs tend to use particularly those social media that enable them to get a message out, rather than sit there passively using social media to receive information. And the social media that comes top as a means of engagement is Facebook. 7 out of 10 MEPs say that they use it at least weekly. But they also use Wikipedia an awful lot, and they also use YouTube a lot. Now, that's not uniformly the case across the board. For example, if you ask MEPs who are slightly older, people born before 1960, the use of social media, the rate drops very significantly indeed. But it all points that younger cohort and the frequency with which they use social media underline the fact that it's here to stay. It's the tool of the future for campaigning, for communicating with this important audience. I should also add that the other audience we quizzed for this survey, people who broadly speaking comprise the Brussels bubble, do use social media in a slightly different way. When it comes to journalists and think tanks, for example, Twitter's very important. For all of the other types of people that you find who aren't elected, they may be commission officials and work in think tanks and NGOs, they tend to use social media in more of a reactive way than MEPs would. The main differences I see between the London political market, if I can put it like that, and the Brussels market is that in London, it's the NGOs, the single issue campaign groups that are driving the use of the internet generally as a means of leveraging the public support that they have, compared with the more corporate use that we've seen in a Brussels context. And we haven't quite seen yet in a Brussels context that sort of popular campaign, because potentially you could have, well, tens of millions of people rallying behind a cause if they feel it sufficiently emotionally, if they can get sufficiently engaged. And that's the contrast at the moment. But the flip side to that means that companies and trade associations, well-organized NGOs, could equally use, for example, the online petition system, use other types of social media to marshal support across the whole of the European Union. I mean, the scope for doing that is phenomenal. From a, if you like, a selfish perspective for a politician, they can use the internet for raising money, for getting to audiences that otherwise are quite difficult to do so. And it is hard for politicians to get that share of voice in the traditional media. The barriers to entry in some instances can be very high. What's particularly exciting though, I think, is the prospect of using social media to get much closer to electors. Now, of course, they can do that using the sort of business that I'm in, but they can engage an awful lot more people when there is no cost involved, no marginal cost involved on either side, to feeding in views, to crowdsourcing opinion. The big question that leaves, however, is the role of politicians as leaders or followers of public opinion. I'll give you one very good example, and that is in the case of the death penalty. It is entirely conceivable that using the most democratic means of communicating with voters, that a politician would conclude what they ought to really do is advocate the return of the death penalty, when quite clearly, politically, internationally, globally, that would be an unthinkable thing to take up. So with caution, I think it's eminently doable to use social media for the development of policy in a way that really strikes home with people. The great thing about social media is that you can actually tell who has been receiving your message, even if it's in a relatively shallow way. You don't know quite how much they've absorbed. there are ways of finding out how much they've absorbed, but at a very basic level, it does enable you to get at least some degree of confidence that the people that you're targeting have actually seen your material in a way that the traditional media really don't allow.